Welcome, and we'll start off with, let's take a look here. Okay, I believe that's where we are. Make sure it is correct. Yes, this is it. Good morning, Judith. Good to see you. Okay, so we are on these Noachide laws, and we're talking here about cases of murder and how they are to be punished. And basically, murder is a capital offense. And that's what this verse is talking about, right? Um, Here we go. So that in the case of murder, umiyad adam, umiyad ish achiv edrosh, and from the hand of a man, or from the hand, in other words, and of course we're talking about power, right? Something like that when we talk about hand, right? The hand of a man, his brother, edrosh et nefesh adam. So exactly the point about achiv here means, fellow rather than blood brother. Edrosh, I will require et nefesh adam, the soul of a person. In other words, meaning that God will expect that this person who was killed, that their soul will be atoned for through the death of the murderer. Right? Just take the next verse as well. Shofech dam, the one who spills blood, Adam, of human beings, in other words, murders, but Adam damo yishafech, by man his blood will be poured. Kivetzelet Elohim, because in the image of God, asa et Adam, he created human beings, he created man. So, umiyad ha'adam. So, at the at the instance of man, Melamed sheben Noach. This teaches you sheben Noach, that a Noachide, meaning a non-Jew, niherag afilu al piatzmo, may be actually sentenced, put to death, even at his own testimony. That because normally, of course, we have the rule that you cannot testify against yourself. Within Jewish law, you're not allowed to testify against yourself, certainly in these kinds of cases. But when it comes to non-Jews, according to their laws, and according to the Noachide laws, they are able to testify against themselves, even in a capital case. So that's
Hmm.
that. Yeah. Okay, let's take a look. Mefaresh, right? What he's doing is he is interpreting umiyad ha'adam, this phrase umiyad ha'adam, from the hand of the man, and they're understanding from the hand of man atzmo, meaning himself. In other words, they're understanding this verse as where it says umiyad ha'adam as meaning and at the instance of the person themselves. Right? That's how they're understanding this verse. Vahine, and in fact, Harambam Poskin, he says
All from Harriet Ladenstein.
and sorry, you'll have to mute. Forgive me. Uh, and other commentaries, right? The other commentators, lo heviu pratze. They don't bring this particular specific. They don't mention in there where they're mentioning Jewish law, halacha. They don't mention this particular law. Bedine b'nei Noach. They don't mention this particular law of Noachides. And he says in Maimonides, right? I think this means Besof Perek Tet, at the end of chapter 9, Mi Melachim. That's the chapter, the section Maimonides has, basically on, literally it means on kings, but it has to do with adjudication, and also it takes into account non-Jews as well in that context. Ve'ulai, and possibly, mishum dehamayen b'Yerushalmi, that if someone takes a close look at the Yerushalmi passage, let's take a look where this is from. Okay, you see that this passage is taken from the Talmud Yerushalmi, Kiddushin, chapter 1, halacha 1. Okay, so he's referring to this particular chapter in the Yerushalmi. You would see the en girsa zo, that this particular version, this particular text, okay, berura kokach. It's not so clear exactly how it's expressing itself. It's not so clear. Uve Talmudenu, and in our Talmud, meaning the Babylonian Talmud, the one that we use basically as a basis of Jewish law, lo nimtza chidush din zeh. You don't find this particular interpretation at all about the fact that a ben Noach can be executed at the basis of his own testimony against himself. We don't find it at all. Ulachach, and for this reason, lo matzu haposkin, the halachic decisors, right, the people who figure and explain and derive halacha, they didn't find an occasion ledavar barur. They didn't find a clear statement, lahachlit, so as to establish, to determine din zeh, this particular law. The Omnam, he says, however, al pi drasha zo de Yerushalmi, if we look at this particular interpretation in the Yerushalmi, that a Jew, that a non-Israelite can be put to death at their own testimony. Yitba'er, it becomes me'od, we start to understand very clearly Lashon HaPasuk, the language of the verse, Bishmuel Bet, in the second book of Samuel, Aleph, chapter 1. Keshahaya dan David Hamelech, when David the king was judging, was proclaiming judgment, et Hanar, the youth, Hamagid, who said, right, he came to David and he told David, this young, no, it was not a Jewish person, not an Israelite, he came and told David, Kihu hemit et Shaul, that he personally executed Saul, he killed Saul. Amar lo, so David said to him, Dimcha al roshcha, your blood is on your head. Ki picha anabacha, for your mouth has spoken against you. Lemor, saying, Anochi, I'm going to guess, matatati et Mashiach Hashem, that you yourself said, I have killed the anointed, I've murdered the anointed of the Lord. Upiresh Rashi, and Rashi explains there, Chovat ketocha, the obligation of your execution, Tihi bereshcha, that it shall be upon your head. Ein onesh b'mitatcha, there is not going to be any punishment regarding your death of the young person, ela la'atzmacha, it is on yourself. It is on your advisement. Ad kan l'shono, and that's the end of the quote from Rashi. That's what Rashi says at that verse. The ein ze mevu'ar kochach, and this Rashi interpretation isn't so clear. It's a little difficult to understand. Aval laha but if we understand it in the context of this Yerushalmi that we read, the bnei Noach neherag al pi edut atzmo, that a son of Noah, a Noachide, can be executed by his own testimony. Yitba'er halashon. So all of a sudden, the language here becomes much clearer, becomes clarified. And now we can understand very comfortably what the purpose is of these particular verses, the dok, and of course, that we kind of understand as QED. Right? So, next verse. So this is where it said, remember, we read it. It says, the one who spills the blood of a human being, of a man, by human beings, they will be killed, right? But Adam damo yishafech. So shofech dam ha'adam, one who spills the blood of a man. For af bat Noach sheharga nehereget. And not only do we talk about a male, right, a man who committed murder, but even a female bat Noach. If she commits murder, she also is put to death, right? So both the one who perpetrates it, the one who is murdered, doesn't matter as far as the gender is concerned. It is they are going to have to face capital punishment. And I realize maybe in some ways it seems that it should be commonsensical, but when it comes to legal issues, one wants to look at the language very, very carefully and make sure that you're actually following the legal definitions and the legal understandings of this. For afopi, and despite the fact that ktiv miyad ish, right? Despite the fact that it's written at the hand of a man. Ish is a man. Isha is a woman, right? So, hadar kativ shofech dam hadam, right? It goes ahead and adds, it says, one who spills the blood of a man, mikol makom, no matter what. So, take a look here, right? Ukahai Gavna, he says this is done similarly. Darshinan la'el b'parshat Bereshit. Again, we have a similar kind of interpretation, meaning that we don't take the word ish literally as meaning a male, but we understand it simply meaning as humans, right? The pasuk, and in the verse it says, "Al ken ya'azov ish," where it says, "Therefore a man leaves his family and goes and marries," right? That it doesn't. So here, what we're being told is that it doesn't just mean a man, right? It means a woman as well. She will leave her family to go and establish a family on her own, etc. Ubepashat Mishpatim, and likewise in the Parsha of Mishpatim in Exodus, Bepasuk Makeh Ish, where the verse says, one who strikes a man, here we are, etc., V'yein Mashakadu Sham, and see what is written there. So one who strikes a man, whether it's a woman or a man who does the striking, they have to, there it's referring to killing someone as well. Malke ish v'met, right? One who strikes a man and so that he dies. So there, again, the analysis is such that it's not based on whether it's a man or a woman, but we understand that language as meaning both. Okay. Here we go. Dam ha'adam ba'adam. So that's, we have all of this, right? Let's take a look at here. Here, dam ha'adam, even though we have a comma here, ba'adam. Right, but they're reading, remember, in the Torah itself, there are no punctuation marks. So they're looking at this verse and analyzing it as if it was saying, the blood of a man in a man. Okay, so, Damoy Shafech, his blood will be spilled. So let's take a look. Tani, Mishum Rabbi Yishmael. It's taught, Tani, of course, meaning an earlier source of Mishnaic origin, either, in other words, before the year 200. In the name of Rabbi Yishmael, Amru, they said, Ben Noach Chayav al Ha'ubarin, that even killing a fetus is considered murder for a Noachide. Interesting, right? Especially in the context of nowadays, where we are we are told that, for example, an abortion is in a sense an act of murder. But here we're saying that within the Noachide law system, even killing a fetus is considered an act of murder. How do we know this? The Amar Kra, because scripture states, Shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam, right? If we read it without the commas, it says, one who spills the blood of a man in a man. Damoy shafech, his blood shall be spilled. Eza hu adam shehu ba'adam. So what are we talking about if we're talking a man that is in a man, right? Heve omer, I need to say, ze ubar, we're referring now to a fetus, shebema'e imo, which is in the loins of his mother. So just a lovely example, actually, of how carefully the analysis can go. Going on. Ulachad man amar. But according to one opinion here, Yalfinan, we learn this out, mi pasuk ze De kol mita, we learn from this particular verse, de kol mita amura livnei Noach, that all capital punishments, right, that every time a Noachide is sentenced to death, right, eina ela chenek, we are referring to strangulation. That is the way a Noachide is put to death, officially put to death through strangulation. Veshadi le hai Adam, and he literally it means he throws for him hai Adam, this Adam, a sefer dekra, right? That to the end, to the last part of the verse, da darish be hachi, and that's the way he interprets it. So let's take a look and see if we can make sense of it. Okay, all right. So here's the last Adam. Okay, so let's see. I think what he's saying, what we're going to understand. This is an alternative explanation. Okay, that saying that this particular that the way in which this person's blood is spilled is by a man. Let's keep going and we'll see. Hopefully that'll give us some clarification. Right? V'darish behachi. But Adam, this is the way he understands it. But Adam damo yishafech, through man his blood will be spilt. Ezahu shfichat damin shel Adam. What are we talking about when we're talking about spilling blood of another person? Shehel b'gufo shel Adam. That it is that when that's being done, it's done to the body of the human being. Heve omer zo chenek. We would have to say that this is strangulation. In other words, what it's saying is that this person is killed, and there is no the blood is still inside the human being. There's no actual spilling of the blood, right? So that what we're under, let's see if we can take a careful look at this, right? So, okay. So dam adam, but adam damo. So in other words, it's understanding one who spills the blood of a person, but adam damoy shafech. In other words, when that person is put to death, but adam damoy shafech, that in the blood needs to be in the person when it is being spilled. In other words, strangulation, because the person is whole. There's no actual blood that is spilling out when that person is killed. It's executed. So that's another way. In other words, we're now running this verse in a different kind of way. Okay, let's keep going. Aval anu kaimalan, but he says the truth is our tradition is the mitato shel b'nei Noach, that the way in which Noachites are executed b'sayif, they are decapitated. In other words, through the sword. And as we will see a little bit later on, and that's right here in this interpretation. So we're on this interpretation here, but when we get to this, we're going to see that in fact it is saif. There's the word that it's done through the sword. That's the way every
I have a
capital offense is done. Yes, Mike, did you want to say something?
question. Yeah, so we're talking about Noahides. So what
Yes.
about freed slaves raised by Jews or converts? Are
Okay.
they're killed differently, right?
They are not considered Noachides.
Okay, not okay.
Once you right, because as you said, when even a Canaanite slave becomes is owned by a Jew, essentially, if they're males, they are circumcised and they're already partly Jewish. Okay, but let's make sure we can keep going on here, right? So here we go. That's the way we understand it. For Imkain, and if this is the case, Mimela kaima da rashato shel Rabbi Ishmael shelafanenu. And if we're going to interpret it as instead of understanding it in the way that we were saying that it refers to strangulation, if in fact we say that we're going to interpret and parse this verse in a different way, then the initial interpretation of Rabbi Ishmael, that's what we quoted up here, right? Which says that a ben Noach, a Noachide, is responsible for the death of fetuses, that's a capital offense, right? He says this interpretation of Rabbi Ishmael that we just read is still appropriate. V'chein kaimalan, and in fact, that's the way we do it. So what are we saying? Just to try and clarify what's happening here. If we understand, if we're going to take the verse and read it as dam adam ba'adam, right? If we read it that way, which we said we could interpret as meaning that when this person is killed, right, it has to remain in the person, meaning strangulation. If we don't understand it that way, if we read it as ba'adam damo yishafech, right? That we're talking about that damo yishafech, that his blood is spilled, right? That when the person is executed, his blood is spilled. Well, that we're going to say has to do with decapitation, because clearly blood is spilt when a person is decapitated. And if we go that way, then we can still read this as dam ha'adam ba'adam. We can still understand this as meaning that a Noachite is responsible for the death of a fetus. That is adam ba'adam, right? We said that means a man who's in a man, and that's referring to the fetus that is still in the womb of its mother. So that's it. Just as you can see, it's just a further analysis of looking at these verses very, very carefully and trying to understand them in that particular way. All right. Let's take a look. We'll see if we can do one other. Here we go. Dam ha'adam ba'adam, right? The blood of a man, through another man. And that's how we're going to understand this here, right? Uh, Initially, we were talking about it as an executioner, formal, having gone through a trial, etc. We're going to read it in a different context. Tanya, again, an early source. Rodef, a pursuer. Shehaya rodef achar chavero lahargo. A pursuer who is pursuing his fellow in order to kill him. In other words, he's pursuing him in order to murder him. Amar lo, so say to him, all right, or said to him, Ra'eh, right, see, she Yisrael hu uven britu, that he is an Israelite and he is a son of the covenant. Torah amra, and the Torah said, Shofech dam ha'adam. It said that one who spills the blood of a person, ba'adam damo yishafech, by means of another person, his blood shall be spilled. Hatzel, and we understand this to mean Hatzel damo shel zeh, rescue the blood of this one, bedamo shel zeh, with the blood of the other one. In other words, it's giving permission to a person who sees someone else being pursued in order to kill them, to kill the pursuer. That's what this is trying to tell us. Take a look at Torah Temimah on this, right? Kol haro'eh oto. That is to say, anyone who sees such a person, yishpoch damo, he should spill that pursuer's blood. Bishvil oto adam shehu rodef, on the account or for the sake of the person whom he is pursuing. Dahaino ba'adam, that what we're saying is that the ba'adam here, that it means, we could mean through the person. We're understanding bishvil hatzalat, for the sake of. In other words, the ba here means for the sake of hatzalat adam, the rescuing of that person, hanirdaf, who is being pursued. V'Iyin Birushalmi Sanhedrin Perek Hey Halacha Aleph. He says, and you can compare this and look further on in the Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Tractate Sanhedrin, chapter 5, Halacha A. So, and I think this may be a good place for us to stop today. Okay. And this is the Damoy Shafech, and that's the one that says that has to do with how a Noachide is executed.
I don't understand, Rabbi, the difference between the three things that you strangulation, stoning, and you're cutting your head off. What or what if you spill blood or don't spill blood? Which one is to be executed for? I don't understand that.
So, if I understand your question correctly, Harlan, you're saying, what difference does it make with how a person is being executed? What's the significance of these ways of executing? And there are actually four ways, okay? There's strangulation, there's decapitation, there's stoning, and there's burning, okay? And I think that it has to do with the idea that death atones for all sins, that there is this understanding that our lives are going to be held accountable, that whatever we accomplish, whatever we do, whether if we are wicked, if we act wickedly, we're going to have to account for our wickedness, and if we act righteously, we will in fact that'll be accounted for, and we will reward for that. Okay. Having said that, death, if one goes to trial for having committed a crime, a capital offense, and the court finds you guilty and sentences you, that sentence, I believe, essentially wipes out any accountability, any guilt that you may have when you move on to the next life. And so, nature of that particular penalty has the effect then of it. In other words, it becomes significant. Not that there's any pain involved. All these deaths are supposed to be instantaneous and as painless as possible. And in fact, if my memory serves me, before they actually administered any of the other deaths, such as decapitation, stoning and burning, they would strangle the person to begin with, meaning they would essentially cut off the blood supply to their brains so that they'd be unconscious when these other punishments were actually administered, so that they didn't have to consciously experience in any way these particular punishments. But regardless, it was an act of cleansing, because we spent a lot more time on the other side of this life than we do on this, and that there be ways in which a person can set the book straight again. And that's the significance of these various different kinds of capital punishment.
Yeah, but what about the pain? I mean,
well, like I said, the strangulation was supposed to be instantaneous. I mean, clearly there's great concern, and I'm sure it's a fearful process by which they would get the person set up for the strangulation. But in terms of actual physical discomfort, whatever discomfort was going on would be mental and not physical.
You're not supposed to have a pain or anything like that.
No, the idea is that the person's life is being curtailed because of their behavior. Even then, when one studies the Tractate Sanhedrin, you realize, that it was under very extreme circumstances they would even consider actually, executing someone. Because we know that the problem is that once you've executed someone, you can't restore their life to them. And if you've made a mistake, if the court has made a mistake and neglected some element, etc., that would render the person innocent. It's like being a murderer, because it takes an innocent life. Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah. So they're not a convert is not a Noahide, but are they executed the same way as a Jew, or are there still different
Okay. So the point is that with a Jew, there are these four different ways in which a Jew is executed or could be executed. When it comes to a Noachide, the point that I believe is being made here is there's just simply one way. That a Noachide does not have to experience they either experience strangulation or they experience decapitation, depending on who you're following. In other words, there's one school of thought that says it's strangulation, and there's another school of thought that says it's decapitation.
Hmm.
And essentially, the halacha follows on the decapitation. But that's it. Okay, that's the only, in other words, it's saying that any time a Noachide is sentenced, and that sentence is carried out to capital punishment, that it's either going to be, according to one opinion, it's decapitation, according to the other opinion, it's strangulation. And we don't make distinctions, as we do within Jewish law for Jews.
Hmm.
I think.
Okay, I mean, I hope that clarifies it. Tough
Yeah,
subject.
that's right.
I've been having to teach tough subjects just lately. Okay.
I think the main thing, I think Cain got away with murder then. He wasn't decapitated or killed.
No, he wasn't. But at that particular point, there's a whole discussion as to, first of all, Cain was punished. He was basically banished, okay? But the point is that at that time, Cain did not realize the consequences of his behavior, whereas all subsequent generations did understand the consequences of their behavior.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't that Cain wasn't punished. He was. Okay. But, and according to some tradition, he was actually killed, a generation or two later.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Wow.
In an accident. But yes.
You
So if you wanted to,
two witnesses to a trial?
And
Jewish?
you need a minimum of two witnesses, and they also, by and large, has to be forewarning, which is done by others, I believe. In other words, you have to be able to determine that the person is doing this fully conscious of what they're doing, of the implications of what they're doing.
Yeah, but you got to watch the witnesses too. They could be false
Yes,
witnesses.
that's true. That's very true. Yep, there's a whole tractate that talks about that, or at least part of that tractate discusses it. In Tractate Makot, they discuss that. And Sanhedrin, a little bit in Sanhedrin as well. They talk about the situation of false witnesses. But it's the job of the judges to cross-question the witnesses in such a way that if they're lying, they're going to be found out.
Okay, perjury, yeah.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.